That concludes our speakers. I'll open it for questions.
What was your reaction when you saw how law enforcement officials reacted in the Uvalde shooting?
That was a very troubling situation. You know, as a general rule, when you don't have all the facts and it hasn't been a complete investigation, you don't like to prejudge. But it goes without saying that for myself and for all my colleagues that were very troubled of everything that we heard about what sounded like there was an inaction at the beginning of that incident. In general, usually you wait for there to be an official after-action report so you can get the precise details of what occurred before judging.
So, if I may, not having seen this document, is it like suggestions for a memorandum of agreement? I mean, can we see it? You have it?
I do, sir. I believe it was released to the press already, but I can take you through some of the highlights.
Rather than that, what does it convey? Is it like a model for communities to follow, or something else?
Well, the bottom line is what we're looking to do is to try and get down to the nuts and bolts and give some concrete examples of the type of technology and the type of doors, types of windows, type of software that you could use to make your schools safer. Chief Mello, would you like to talk about that further?
How many police departments use this kind of, already have this in place, and how many have yet to adopt it?
So let me just address your first question about what the document contains. So it is a basic document in terms of guidelines and principles and recommendation based upon, from a law enforcement perspective, what we saw as best practices about the physical security that should be considered in school buildings, school construction, and renovations. So talking to our police chiefs across the state and their colleagues in their communities in terms of superintendents, we found that a lot of them were looking for, a lot of times they were relying on other buildings that had been built, architects, without really involving law enforcement in the discussion. So we created the document as a common sense approach of these are the items that we think are helpful in making your buildings more secure and thereby safer.
Do you have a sense of how many departments? I mean, there's a school building boom going on now. You referenced the new school in East Providence.
Correct.
Does that meet those recommendations, and do others?
We don't know which schools do and which don't. As you know, every school was required to conduct that safety assessment at the governor's direction during the month of June, I believe that was. The assessment is the assessment, right? And it stops at the assessment. This goes beyond the assessment and makes suggestions and recommendations in terms of what you should consider in terms of security in your building.
Is this in response to the shooting in Uvalde, or was this already in the works beforehand?
So it was in response to the shooting in Texas. That and many others, right? So law enforcement, as we have seen these incidents occur over the years, we have adjusted in a lot of ways in terms of our training, our communications with our school partners, how we build those protocols of technology to schools. Not everybody has taken that step. Every time that we see that type of incident occur, there's no doubt that law enforcement leaders assess that and adjust what we do in terms of our training from our perspective. This is offering our expertise to school officials on what we feel is important in their buildings.
So this is a recommendation, it's not really mandatory. Will any of these things become mandatory?
That's not up to us to determine whether they're mandatory or not. They're simply recommendations and guidelines at this point. As I suggested, the fire services, as usual, usually ahead of the curve in terms of planning, do a great job, have been doing so for more than a century in terms of what standards are required in school buildings. I think this is the beginning of that conversation of what would be required. This is just merely our suggestion from our perspective as law enforcement professionals.
So is it meant to be going forward? In other words, are these guidelines for existing buildings or are they for new construction?
Both.
And is there any money, like who's going to pay for them?
So most of them are smaller projects, right? They're not major recommendations. A lot of it are very obvious common sense approaches that sometimes it's just it's missed by some school officials, some local leaders who are making the decision about what is appropriate in the schools. And the reality is this: not every school department, right, in their parent population really wants to see security enhancements in their buildings. We know that, so we hope that this document is helpful for school officials to move that conversation along with those parents as well.
The document you're willing to share?
We have the document. It should have been shared with you. I think they're going to be able to push that out to you right now.
Hi, just knowing that this was prompted from Uvalde, could you highlight maybe one or two things that are in this guideline that you would say were maybe faults in Uvalde?
In terms of the communications from the school to the police, I think that would be the most obvious one for us. I'd like to believe that every community has a pre-existing relationship between their school and their police officials in their community. I wouldn't assume that, though. I think again, it's about minutes, right? We're talking about minutes of time and saving lives in those minutes of time. I think the one thing that needs to be really addressed is how quickly police are alerted to these threats within their buildings. So I think we all can do better at that. So that would be the one thing that would relate to the shooting in Texas.
And do we have any sense of, and I think someone asked this, but just to get more clarity, from that review process that happened, the inspections in June, do we have any sense of how many districts are safe, are following all the, crossing the I's and dotting the I's and crossing the T's?
I wouldn't have that information. That would have to come from the department, Rhode Island Department of Education. Right, that's where all those had to be submitted to.
So this is a committee, is this a first step? Will the conversation continue? Will more recommendations, be brought to the table at another day?
Yeah, I would suggest that this is a continuing conversation. As I said, this is the beginning of the conversation. This is really nuts and bolts, common sense approach, what we thought, because we knew that the governor fast-tracked some grant funding to be available to the schools in every community. So we felt it was appropriate for us as law enforcement to say, these are the things that we think are most effective when you're considering how to best invest those dollars.
And have all schools received the document?
They will after today.
And looking at the recommendations right now, one of the factors was staff training. Will that be staff working in direct relation with police to try to figure out what to do in a situation like that to be better prepared?
So that's one of the recommendations that we encourage, that in terms of training school staff, that they partner with law enforcement for that training, but as importantly, that they include their staff and be able to provide that training amongst themselves. We want to make sure that there's a partnership there, right? It does include how to respond to those threats. That training, I want to be clear, that training already occurs in most communities where school staff in partnership with law enforcement are already trained about what to do in these types of events. We're trying to make sure that that continues, that that conversation expands and continues into the future.
Possibly a question for the Lincoln superintendent, but knowing that we're at the school right now, is there something that you should mention is going great in regards to these guidelines that you guys are hitting directly in the school, and maybe something that you could see your school implementing from these guidelines?
Sure, thank you. So you noticed when you walked into the building, there was a 3-tier system to get you in the front door. That's a system that automatically locks after a certain point in the morning, and administrators are there in the morning to make sure the people who are coming in the school are supposed to be the people coming in the school. We have a vestibule system in every single one of our schools, but there are blind spots everywhere, right? So one of the areas that we looked at with utilizing the money that the governor allocated after that, after the announcement about all the schools had to have their all-hazard site safety surveys in by June 10th, are things like increasing cameras, increasing outside lighting, more training for staff, which we work in conjunction with the police department often to facilitate those trainings for our staff and our students. So those are the upgrades that we're looking at here. We also have had upgrades built into last year's budget for the middle school. So it is something that is front of mind really for all superintendents, but here I think you saw some of those security features as you walked in. Thanks.
And if I could have just one more follow-up, how important are SROs? In other words, do the recommendations include SROs in every school?
I believe the recommendations mention SROs, and personally, I think you heard in my opening remarks, they're a crucial component to the school environment for safety and security, but really they build relationships with kids, and oftentimes information is gotten by SROs that wouldn't necessarily have gotten out there because of the positive relationships they build with the students in the schools.
How do you ensure that this doesn't wind up on the shelf?
Good morning. That's the real reason for why we're doing this today, right? One of the things that, in speaking to some of the superintendents, was the issue that there's turnover of superintendents. Well, there's also turnovers of police chiefs. And we want to make sure that that conversation is the first conversation. So nothing can happen at the school until those conversations continue. So that's a reason for this, right? Putting a spotlight on it, letting you know that we're actually out there and talking about it. And if I may, one of the points that was brought up about why are we doing this now? What's the changes? What specific event? In Rhode Island, after Sandy Hook, our training for all of our officers changed from sitting back, assessing, and making a determination how to eliminate a threat, to training our officers now, go after the threat, right? As soon as you can identify, go to eliminate that threat. That's obviously a concern that we've seen in Uvalde that doesn't appear to have happened, but as the chief said, we'll wait for the full report to come out on that. But that's a huge change that we made here in Rhode Island. And also in Uvalde, one of the things that we saw that's in our report is not the propping open of doors for convenience, right? So one thing that this is going to do, it's going to give administration something to support the idea when maybe teachers are saying, yeah, but I have to walk all the way around the building, or I don't have to come in until a half hour after everybody else. So we leave the back door open and we prop it open so that somebody, so that I can come in. It's a convenience thing. We're here, this report is to show in some areas, convenience can't be an excuse, right? When we get lazy, that's when things happen, mistakes happen. So directly to there, in the report it discussed one point of entry or having controlled entry points, and during certain times of the day, as the doctor said, that changes over how that happens. So I just wanted to add that to the comments that were there. Steve, did you have? I don't think there's anything in the report that's earth-shattering, but there are points in the report that point to technology that are advancing all the time, right? And this doesn't necessarily take into issue, well, how much it's going to cost, but rather these are best practices. So that's a determination community by community that they have to make from there.
What is your message to parents who may be a little bit nervous sending their kids to school this coming fall, just because of what's been happening?
I would let the public know that this is something that keeps your police chiefs up at night. Every department in the state has a program. So this is not like a new initiative for us. But when something happened in Texas, and we're people too, and we have kids, and so that touches you. So everybody wants to double down, triple down on what you're doing. So what this really was is an effort for us to kind of take all of our expertise that we have and how we've been working at it, whether it's a school official or the fire department, or we had an intelligence analyst from the U.S. Attorney's Office come down and help us as well, trying to have the apex, the absolute best practices for us to aim up at in everything that we're doing. That's really what it's about. We've been working at this the entire time, but there's really about to double down in that effort.
And are there concerns with staffing shortages and recruitment challenges with police with having SROs in every school?
Every department does work at that, and we work very closely with our individual superintendents. Just to use my department, for example, it's a small jurisdiction, so we only have 3 schools, and we do have 2 SROs. But for that 3rd school, we work in between using the area cars and using the SROs that we do have to kind of, switch off and make sure we have increased presence, increased presence during drop-off and pick up anytime that those kids are outside of the school. And usually when you talk to any chief from any jurisdiction, will say something similar, that they're using all of their resources. This is a priority for them to make sure that they're having presence at the schools. Would we like to have more officers? And like I said, this recruitment is difficult right now, but it's something that we're all working on.